All right, thank you for choosing the Minority Alliance organization meeting today. Today we'll be discussing the history of the Black Panther Party and also doing a quick rundown of current events and things that we've seen in the news that have been occurring. Um, with the Black Panthers, I know when we first discussed talking about this topic, it really kind of struck home because the reason why that organization, was established, began, were a lot of the same things that we see ourselves still fighting now. The same issues that we're trying to look to solve with equality are the same issues that they were looking to solve back in the 60s. Um, it's just with Black History Month, I think speaking on the Black Panther organization is very important because this is not organization that is discussed very broadly within education or anything of that nature. You kind of got to go out of your way to learn a little bit about their history and what they were all about and the truth behind the Black Panther organization. For me, I would like to start with the figure who was not one of the original founders, but was a very charismatic character who would have possibly been one of the first black politicians that we could have saw reach uh, a high level within the United States government, which was Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was one of the most vital characters within the Black Panthers organization movement because he was able to illustrate vividly through his wording the inequality that people were going through at that time, and he was able to connect with people on both ends of the issue, whether they were black or white at the time. So him being very charismatic, people were very drawn, and he was a very great figure within the movement, being able to bring in that notice and bring in a lot of people who may have not originally looked at certain things of inequality that were occurring at that time. He was able to bring them into a closer view on the issue and things of that nature and be able to articulate well uh, the setting of black inequality at that time period. With as I said, with this organization, it's a lot of the same issues that we are still facing today. But even in the history of it, Mark, I would like for you to talk about a little bit about how the organization began and what were their true intentions when they first began and things of that nature.
Okay. The first thing to keep in mind is that this year marks 55 years since the founding of the Black Panther Party. And when you consider the tie-ins between what we've seen throughout history and what we see today, what we saw in the civil rights movement versus what we see today, and what is kind of a modern civil rights awakening, is rooted in the history of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panthers actually started and was founded as a way to kind of fight against initially police brutality. This was done in the wake of the death of Malcolm X and the death of Matthew Johnson, who was a young man who was killed, who was, gunned down by police officers. And it was the outrage of that and the inequality that they were seeing in police brutality in low income minority neighborhoods. And stop me if this sounds familiar. So as they went on, they began to look at different things that that they were seeing, and how we could accomplish these goals ourselves. Because, and I know you'll speak a little bit more to their 10-point plan, but, some of the major features in that plan was being able to, kind of have some autonomy over our own future. And some of those things involved, getting land. Some of those things involved having opportunities for employment, equal opportunities for employment. Some of those things were involved healthcare. Again, stop me if this sounds familiar. So, they had a vision of how they wanted things to go, and how they saw that the system as it was constructed was not constructed for us. Therefore, we had no real shot of flourishing in that system. It was a system that wasn't built for us. This is the mid 60s. We are just now in a point where begrudgingly, civil rights laws for African Americans were being signed into law. And the amount of bloodshed that it took for that to happen, the amount of pushback it took for those things to happen, the amount of bloodshed that it took for simple things like school integration. You know, it's something that we, kind of look at today as we see some of the pushback that we see in African American and Native American and Hispanic American. The way that you attempt to integrate and the pushback that you see from that. This was the things that they faced 55 years ago when they decided that the best way for them, since they had no real representation, they had no real, no one looking out for them and no one looking out for the neighborhoods and nobody looking out for one another, was to kind of do it on their own. And being branded a gang for doing so, was just something that was something they were willing to live with, because they believed in trying to get what was ours, because we are a part of this country. We've been a part of this country. We had, we sweat, we bled, we built a lot of things, that we built a lot of America's wealth. And, being able to say that and knowing it are two different things, and being able to act on it as well. So that was a really big, kind of starting point for the Black Panther Party. Now, they weren't just about getting those things and getting more of our piece of the pie, so to speak. We wanted to be a part of the system. One of the biggest things that they were a part of was actual political activism and actually working towards getting people elected. They actually were able to successfully campaign for people and push people into office. So they had a type of political impact, being able to integrate programs that we still see today in schools, like free lunch programs. And, so this wasn't just about, fighting back against a system that we felt was unjust. It was about, kind of changing the spectrum of what it was to be Black in America and what the entire experience was. So, so as I kick it back to you, and we look through their, kind of their founding and what what their program was going to be. Was it perfect? Of course not. No program is, no movement is, but it was definitely, something that had an idealism about it, and a radical idealism about it, because it actually took advantage of the American system, which is, we are a hybrid system. We take pieces of different forms of government and kind of mold them into what we feel is best for the overall collective, and begin to integrate those things. It rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. So, that ended up being how the party was founded, and how it links up perfectly in sync to kind of what we see today.
Yes, sir. And another thing, that I wanted to quickly discuss, when we are speaking on the history of their organization, was we see something similar that has just occurred a couple weeks ago with the Capitol riot here that was in Washington, D.C. But it's a clear, what do you say, a clear black and white difference between both of these situations and what was trying to be achieved from both of these situations. And one, you have a group where they were coming and they were saying, they finally want just equality. They finally want, just to be heard. And as you're saying, to be a part of the system, be able to work with the system to make things better for people within their own communities. On the other end, you have something totally different, where people were coming to stop something where the majority popular opinion of Americans had already, made their choice. And we have a system, and the way it works, is just a total different situation. But with the Black Panther Party, why that event was so significant is that was one of the things that really got um, brought notice to their organization and what they had going on and what they were trying to achieve, and kind of got more people to back them and to come into the organization after that event. That event was kind of the catalyst that brought that organization into being, into its facility. Um, Further after that, we're looking at an organization that was able to build chapters in less than 10 years across not only America, but eventually be able to spread internationally and be able to basically bring that fight of equality past just the American borders and be able to put the world on notice of the fight for equality for African Americans in America at the time.
Absolutely. I would say, to echo what you were saying as far as the comparisons to what you saw in the Black Panther Party and their movement, their uncompromising by any means necessary movement, which, that was what the doctrine was, versus what we saw this January at the Capitol. Were the Black Panthers a militant movement? The answer to that is an absolute, unequivocal yes. They were. They were about getting, this level of equality by any means necessary. We had tried other means, and it was unsuccessful. And they were willing to fight back. But the funny thing about that is that they were willing to do that in the name of self-defense. They were willing to do that as a means of, if you draw blood, then we must draw blood. What we saw on January 6th was, we saw militant groups, we saw organizations, we saw things like people like the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, people like that. And what they were after was was an ideology of their own. They were, instead of a more equal system, they were looking for more of a totalitarian system where what they want is what they get and everyone has to take it. And if something were to threaten that, they will do what is necessary to keep it where they feel they had the greatest advantage and where they felt their political and racial ideology would be the most well served. So they did, what they did there. So when you look at these things, they were an armed group. The Black Panthers were an armed group, and some of the groups that we see now are armed groups. But what we do not see now is, we do not see the federal government use the Justice Department and use the FBI to basically do counterintelligence within our own country. Even now, domestic terrorism is not a crime on the books. It is not an actual crime to commit domestic terror. So therefore, some of these groups, regardless of anything they planned, any people they plan to murder, any people they plan to bomb, they plotted a kidnapping of the governor of Michigan, last year. There were incidents where, a lot of chatter, and even chatter online about, committing acts of violence against people who did not agree with them, we're going back and forth. And because there is no particular domestic terrorism crime on the books, a lot of the vitriol of, the American justice system did not fall on them. And I find that interesting when you go back 55 years and the links that were gone to keep the Black Panthers from gaining the type of momentum that it looks like they were on their way to gaining. From infiltrating the organization and, kind of playing on different rivalries and taking something that may be a small crack in between a couple of individuals and making it a chasm. When it came to declaring them a communist regime. And again, when you look at the parallels between then and now, if you want to kill a movement now, label it as communist, label it as socialist, label it as nationalist. No one will hear anything you have to say once those words have been used. And it was no different back then. The mid 60s, was less than 10 years after McCarthyism, where anybody that was a political enemy of Joe McCarthy, he labeled you a communist, he labeled you a Russian sympathizer, and it could have been the end of your career. And it made you subject to investigations, it made you subject to sanction, it made you subject to all sorts of things. And so this is what was brought to bear, along with the full weight and brutality of the police departments that they were trying to fight against. So when you had all those different things, all these different organizations that came down to keep the momentum of the Panther movement down, and when you see that with the absence of putting the brakes on the type of movements that we see today, where you see people who want a specific person installed in office, and we're going to grab guns if we don't get it, or and we're willing to do things that couldn't be done by any other army. The Confederate Army was never able to walk a Confederate flag to the U.S. Capitol. That happened on January 6th, didn't it? And there were so many other things that could have been done, and this could have been so much worse. But when you look at these parallels and the government coming down and doing everything it could to kill a movement because it challenged a well-established doctrine for so long. It became another casualty of the civil rights movement. From my personal point of view, because again, it was another person, it was another organization, whether it be a person or a full organization, that it presented itself as a threat to the established order. And a threat to the established order is fine, just so long as that threat is not a minority. So we got a chance to see how that worked out back then, and we see the parallels to now, and to the type of press that people with that sort of progressive mindset, and especially that sort of progressive mindset towards minorities, are treated, and the words that are used again to keep us from getting any type of momentum. There is nothing socialist about wanting equality. Equality doesn't cost you anything, but there's definitely a communicative message being put out that equality comes at the cost of something to you. Therefore, you should not want it. You should not support it. You should not, you shouldn't even speak highly of it. If you speak on it at all, it should be critical, because everything is fine. Like, no, and the system is working. Well, the problem is that the system is working for the people it was built for, and that was not built for us. And so, again, if I kick it back over to you, the parallels are so striking, that's why I'm so glad that we did this on the Black Panther Party today, because when you look at the reasons that it started, when you look at what they were trying to achieve, and when you look at the weight of what was brought down upon them versus the absence of weight of those on the opposite side of that type of force, those parallels between 55 years ago and today are undeniable.
Yes, sir. And when you spoke on kind of how they were uh pushing people at the time to get out and vote, um I know that was around the time I believe you had Bobby Seale and Elaine Brown running for positions within the American government, coming out of an organization uh, of this type. That was huge. But you see, it last year there was a huge push of getting people registered to vote and things of that nature. Uh, they were one of the first organizations to be able to uh, get thousands of minority people actually registered to vote. We see from Bobby Seale and Elaine Brown election that the Black Panther Party was starting to gain, as you said, momentum, and starting to actually make an indent in the U.S. government and be able to politically actually vault people into positions. Um, Even though I believe they both lost this first election that we're speaking on, uh, it started a kind of a movement of, wow, we actually have a chance to where we can get people who look like us out to represent us and into positions to represent us. And that was huge during that time period because in a lot of areas that had never been seen before, most of the representation um, had been traditional white Americans in the government at that time period. We're going to flip over into the 10-point plan and kind of run down with basically over the current movement, how both of these things are still aligned, and a lot of things that they were looking to fight for at that time are things that we are still discussing today and fighting for. Um, as you said, they were looking for basically overall um, independence and freedom in the sense of, I know the number 10 uh, plan was we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, peace, and people's community control of modern technology. And you can kind of tie that um, that exact point in with a lot of the things that we are discussing now. Even when we discussed a couple weeks ago how we're looking to get more minorities into the technology field and working in the modern technology field, because that is where you can actually make a living in today's society. And that's how we actually reach the levels of equality that we are trying to reach. So this is something that was initially uh, created in the 60s, but carried out throughout the 70s and the 80s, that we're still discussing very heavily today in the current movement. Number 9, we want freedom for all Black and oppressed people now held in U.S. federal, state, county, city, and military prisons and jails. We want trials by jury of peers for all persons charged with so-called crimes under the laws of this country. Even when we speaking on currently the justice system and how there needs to be criminal justice reform, that's basically what they were talking about at that time. And as you said, they may have come about it with more of a different angle with how they stated it, but basically that's the same fight that we're currently fighting for within the criminal justice system today. Number 8, we want an immediate end to all wars of aggression. Um, I think now is basically a universal feeling that I know following the Iraq war and Afghanistan and things of that nature, that we as Americans, period, uh, don't want to find ourselves continuously in endless wars and continuously having to send our civilians overseas to fight battles that basically are never ending. At that time period, I believe the war that they were speaking on was the Vietnam War. Um, and that had affected a lot of minority people who were being sent overseas to fight, but then they came home and was still being oppressed within their own country. Number 7, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of Black people, other people of color, all oppressed people inside the United States. Now, as you said, when we initially started, that's how we just saw a whole movement uh, reignited last year in 2020, was from police brutality. And the number 7 point states exactly that. All that people were asking for last year during the protests was for the end of just the extra brutality and the murders of people by the hands of police officers. Number 6 was we want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. Um, as we can see, I think that's another thing that has went from something that was just a Black Panthers point to something that's universal amongst all Americans currently, is the fight for free healthcare for everyone, at least a basic healthcare where everyone can have these things taken care of when they have certain health issues, especially within a minority community, where you see the least amount of people who are actually insured, even still to this day. As I said, this is something that was spoke on within the 60s that we're still seeing now. Um, their fifth point was we want decent education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. Basically, even that kind of ties into something that we're going to speak on the back end of the video today with what's going on in the Utah school systems, where they're saying, we just want a equal education across the board, where you know minorities can learn of the history that pertains to them and also the history that pertains to them as being an American. Also, it shouldn't be that you don't get to experience one side being educated of your true history and where you come from and things of that nature. As we discuss all the time, our push over the year even still is to get more people to actually do their ancestry test and actually learn on your history, so that way you can be able to study it for yourself, it being currently that these are things are not taught within general education. Their fourth point was we want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. um, I believe that's one thing that has been a huge push, especially towards the end of last year, that people were seeing it being the COVID effect on top of everything else currently. Was you see that there's a huge issue of housing. And as I said, a lot of these points were in the Black Panthers 10-point program, but now these are things that are universally across the board that could pertain to Americans in general, whether you're a minority or not. Uh, the fight for fit shelter for human beings is a huge movement that I believe is just now starting to spark up within America, that we're starting to fight for everyone to have a true opportunity at equal shelter and being able to be taken care of. Um, their point three was we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our people and oppressed communities. Um, Basically, when we were speaking on, I know we actually had a discussion in one of our videos. We spoke on how certain corporations would use minorities to, you know, uh, gain capital from using their likenesses, whether it is an image, using their creativity, using things that they had created without paying correct dues to the person who actually created those things. So that's basically their point with number three is they say capitalists, but in a bigger sense, just when you see creations or when you have minorities who are leaders in certain fields, that they are not suppressed or oppressed. On number two, they had we want full employment for our people. That's something right now that we're currently still seeing. As I said, that's another thing that could go as a universal point for us as Americans in general, because especially as I said, with COVID having an impact on the economy last year. We want to see people having great jobs. We're fighting for $15 minimum wage across the board, which will be something that would help minorities be able to get into more of a situation that they can see equality within housing, within financial areas, and things of that nature. So, their number 2 point is still something, as I said, that's very relevant today, but even more so than being directly towards minorities or African Americans. That's something that's generally generalized for all Americans. Uh, the last point, number 1 point, is we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities. Basically, I think that's the entirety of the movement that you have now, with people are actually starting to stand up and say, They want to own businesses within their own community. They want to have say so within their own community. They want to have local representation within their own community to be able to make these things happen, where you could see full equality across the board for everyone within America, period. Mark, I know as I just spoke on a couple of these points and how they reverberate within the current movement and things that we are currently fighting for on the front now. If you would like to just elaborate on a couple of these and how these are still seen today and we're still looking to change them.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that really stands out to me is the sheer number of times that they, spoke on their own experiences. Obviously, it's the Black Panther Party. It was, these are black men, these are black women. So they were speaking from this perspective of the black experience. But over and over and over again, in almost every single point, they used the term oppressed peoples. When you use the term oppressed peoples, it in that movement and many other movements like it, and even in our own organization, it's important to understand that even though we're speaking from the black experience, being being who we are and being where we're from, this isn't just about that. This is about the experience of the oppressed. This is about the experience of those who've been marginalized. This is about the experience of those who have had their own situation taken advantage of by others for a system not built for them. It's not just for blacks by blacks for the benefit of blacks. That's not what that was about. It was about stop hurting our people, stop oppressing people, live up to the words that you wrote. That's what that thing was about. And it really strikes me when you look at the different things point by point by point of what was going on then and what's going on now. Prison reform, equal housing, healthcare, opportunities at employment, opportunities with technology of things that are going on today, that are going on in the modern world. The oppression and wanting that oppression to stop, police brutality, wanting that to stop. They basically just wrote a breakdown song of the summer of 2020. And so the 10-point plan itself, as you read through it, if nothing else, it drives the nail home so hard that what was going on then, that the fight's not over, the fight's not finished, we're not even halfway home. We are still identifying the actual issues and trying to prevent them from clouding the actual issues so that we can truly address the things that are really holding people back and really allowing those who can, those who've been able to capitalize on those situations and those who have been able to move, public opinion about these things and make it into something else, because there is nothing about anything in that 10-point plan that takes a single thing away from anyone else. No Caucasian in this country is harmed by giving people healthcare as a human right. Not a single Caucasian is harmed by everyone getting equal housing. I live in a city where I cannot go under a freeway overpass without seeing tents of homeless people. Those people aren't just minorities. There are plenty of minorities out there, but those people are homeless veterans. Those people are the mentally ill. Those people are young. Those people are old. But what they all have in common is that they're all marginalized and, in a way, oppressed. So when you look at those things of the 10-point plan versus what we see today, again, it all marries up. It is a perfect marriage to the issues that affect us today. And, I know we're about to switch over to something about, history and about teaching, and again, it gives us a chance to kind of draw that line from where we were in the 60s when we identified and we stood up and we were willing to do what we had to do, whether you had the Black Panther Party who was willing to do it and Malcolm X who was willing to do it his way versus Martin Luther King and John Lewis and those who were trying to do it their way, but they were all looking for the same thing and they were all looking to get us to the same place. And they both sides were met with such anger, such vitriol, and such organized oppression against progression that, you know, we can't help but draw the line between then and now.
Yes, sir. And as you said, as tying in on the Black Panther organization and kind of speaking on our next subject, uh, a lot of these issues are still being uh, seen today all across the board. Um, when you look at the issue within the Utah schools there, uh, where I believe it was a private school within the state, that they actually gave parents the option to allow their student to opt out of learning Black History Month within the curriculum. Um, I know you just kind of wanted to speak on how that, in every way, how that is just, I don't know how to say, shocking, especially with the current movement that we're seeing now and the current things that we're fighting for with equality, to actually have a school that comes out and would even allow an option for somebody to opt out of learning on the history of African Americans within this country.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start off by kind of setting the table on where this whole thing is, because this story was something that came out last week, and obviously with all the other craziness that goes on, in our day-to-day world, it's something that, for the most part, was kind of swept under the rug. And it's something that struck me kind of, odd, and it made me really like kind of look into it, read on it, and kind of look at the broader spectrum of what this is. So, to kind of set the table, this is North Ogden, Utah, and there was a Montessori academy. This school only has 3 Black students. However, they have a Black history, portion of their curriculum, in the month of February. A bunch of parents went to the head of the school and complained about, having to do it, about it not being necessary in the curriculum. And after a lot of complaining, the school, quote unquote, reluctantly allowed those parents to opt out. Now, the head of the school actually put that statement along with the word reluctantly into a Facebook post that he then took down. But it was out there in the ether. So after a lot of public outrage, the school reversed their decision over this past weekend. And a couple of things that were really, really, crazy about it is that that same school system was willing to embrace the quote unquote patriotic curriculum that the Trump administration was attempting to put in last year, where it told its own version of, kind of the history of America with a very kind of glossed over segment of, that whole portion, that little tiny portion where millions of, Africans were enslaved and brought here and, beaten and oppressed and helped build this country's wealth without getting any of it for themselves. So when I looked at that, and it seemed, I mean, obviously it's an outrage, right? We are kind of shocked at how not shocked the rest of the world is when you hear things like that, because it's been going on for so long. But the thing that really, kind of struck out to me was some of the explanations of it. The explanation of why these parents were allowed to opt out is that they were being, and I'm quoting now, allowed to exercise their civil rights. So what I find to be interesting about that is that, again, besides the general thing about there being nothing in the civil rights about you being able to choose what type of curriculum is taught in school, it's the broader aspect of it. It's the broader aspect of there's something negative in our history, and I don't want my child learning it. There's something that doesn't apply to my child. I don't feel applies to my child. Therefore, I do not want my child learning it. And as we've learned, and we've seen many, many times over, racism is not something that you're born with. It's not a hereditary. It's not a receding hairline. It's not the way that the way you brush your hair. It's not any of those things. It's something you learn. And you learn it either by the things that you were taught, or sometimes, and more importantly, by the things you are not taught. There's nothing wrong with history. History is just like math. It has no good guys, it has no bad guys. It simply is. So the history of our country is the history of our country. The problem is that we have not taught history as a curriculum in this nation ever. What we have taught is a listing of folk tales. We were taught that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree and that he did not tell a lie. That's what we read. That's what we read. That's what the songs say. It didn't say how many slaves he owned. It didn't say, during the Revolutionary War that the British had offered freedom to slaves if they fought for the crown, and they won, and that helped begin the process of actually making the North, and the Union, kind of a slave-free area. You don't hear a lot about that history. You don't hear a lot about the contributions that the Frederick Douglasses of the world, the Thurgood Marshalls of the world, and all the long, long list of the African Americans that made such a grand contribution to our system, that you didn't get to hear about them in the same light that you heard. You hear more about Davy Crockett, who was literally a folk tale, versus actual black politicians, black speakers, black writers, black inventors, people who actually helped move the needle forward. Their contributions were no less important than anyone else's in history. But those things were swept under the rug, and there were other people, we'll get into these subjects in other times, who decided that, we at least need to acknowledge this over some period of time. And for whatever reason, it became, and it turned into what we have now, which is Black History Month. And what people will do is sometimes you'll hear them say, well, why is there a Black History Month? Why isn't there a White History Month? Well, let me know when all of your accomplishments have been marginalized to the point where you actually have to set up a date to talk about them. So, that is the equivalent of all lives matter. So when I look at these things, it's such it ties in so perfectly with all the different things that we talk about, because again, we have ourselves a situation where there is an attempt to marry reality to our education, and to the general politics of just growing up. And there's a need to not acknowledge what was done, a need to not acknowledge that there is damage that must be repaired. There can be no actual unity, and we've heard this now with different political things about there not being any unity without accountability. Well, there also can't be any unity or any progression without acknowledgement. The reason why, when someone pleads to a crime, they are forced to stand there, it's called allocution, to stand there and tell what their crime was. It is an admission of the facts of what has happened, and that needs to take place before justice is served. Our justice system seems to understand this. Our rule books seem to understand this. But again, we, as another hard admission is that we oftentimes don't live up to what was written on paper as our doctrine of how we will live and how we will govern. And this school thing, it comes off as a small potatoes kind of thing. It's a single Montessori school, off in Utah, somewhere in a small school, but it really isn't, because it has such larger reaching implications. The ability to just whitewash away what you don't like, the ability to, because it's a Montessori school, because it's a charter school, because it's a privileged school, to be able to take advantage of that privilege and brush away something that you don't feel comfortable with, or that you don't feel applies to you or to your children, and thinking that that's okay, and thinking that that sort of thing is fine, and also teaching your children the lesson that that sort of dismissal of that which is not comfortable to you racially is okay. None of those things are okay. So, I wanted to take a moment, and again, I'll kick it back over to you because I want to get your opinion on all of that. Um, that's why I felt it was important to bring this up, because we see this all the time, and we're so used to it now that little stories like this get swept aside. But this is a textbook um, case of what it is, the reason why we have to fight against this stuff, and the reason why we have to push so hard to make sure that the entire story is not just told but understood, so that people can actually move forward.
Yeah, sir. So I mean, with the story there in Utah, and I mean, as you said, for it to even be an option for anybody to feel like, hey, I want to skip out on this part of history. It shouldn't be more so as Black history or African American history. This is a part of American history, period, and how this country came into being. Uh, Even to extend that into last year, I don't know if it was in one of our videos, but I believe me and you had a discussion about people wanting to abolish a couple of Civil War statues and things of that nature. And I told you my view on that. I said at the end of the day, that's someone's history. And I'm type of person, history is what it is and it's already wrote. Now, the way we go forward into the future and the way we change and evolve and have developed now is totally different from that. But there is no need to ever try to um, minimize anyone's history on either side of the issue. For me personally, that's my personal opinion. You know, um, so I believe when it comes to uh, whether they took it back now at this point and said, "Oh no, everybody has to learn," or not, for that to even have been an issue that had propped up, lets how far along we still have not moved, and we still have yet to go. Um, Kind of closing out, uh, speaking on just currently the things that we're seeing politically. Um, we said, I believe this was about 3 weeks ago, we had a discussion about the impeachment trial and if this was something that could possibly hinder the progression that we could see from the from the Biden administration. Um, I think we're coming to a period of, we've already been what, 1 week in now. We're 1 full week into the impeachment trial. What's the time period, would you say, Mark, on something like this so that we can get back to policy making and not focusing on a whole little side story that has now took a slight bit of time away from the progression that we were seeing?
Yeah. So, as a direct answer to your question, not long. If you follow this, case at all, you definitely know that there is a, kind of a sweeping aside of, kind of what there is going to be, and based on the number of votes needed to, finish this up in one way versus another, is pretty much set in stone. So I would say no later than Monday. Um, this will be over because the cases have actually wrapped up, and the senators had their portion where they got to ask questions. They actually wrapped that up today. So there'll be like deliberations over the weekend, and they will probably come out with a decision on Monday. I couldn't imagine it going any later than Tuesday of next week. So as a direct answer to your question, pretty simple. It's going to be done whichever way it's going to be done. I did have a thought about it though. What was interesting is I didn't, at the beginning of this, I didn't feel like there was any need to actually do this because there's no way, the way our system is fundamentally set up and as partisan as our politics are, there are two things that are fundamentally not possible right now. Impeachment is one, and the 25th Amendment is another because of the type of numbers that you need and the type of people that you do it in the partisan atmosphere in which we live. Understood. But I actually had gotten a little bit of a history lesson this week that actually changed my mind about that. And this is at the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, Harry Truman actually went over to Germany, and he actually went and toured, I believe, two Nazi camps. And he got into one, and this is very soon after the war. I mean, there's still bodies on the facility. And one of the things that he did was he turned to his own press secretary and he told that press secretary to go get newspaper people and to go get, photographers. And they asked him why. And they said, we need to get all of this on the record. We need to get all of this on the record because at no point in history should anyone be able to diminish and say that this didn't happen. No one should be able to make this look less than what it was. So when I think about it, of course, with this going the way that it was going to go and the way everyone knew it was going to go, it's still important to get it on the record. It's still important to kind of get out there and not allow anyone anymore to kind of hide behind their own kind of political curtain and not put their name to the ideology and not put their name to their vote and not put their name to the evidence that you put on record. If you put things on record like they did with a trial like this, where you say, this is what happened, and you put your things out there and you put your evidence out there, you put video, you put audio, and you lay it out there, make everybody see it, make everybody hear it, make everybody, whatever you think is whatever you think. You could think that, this was not a big deal. You could think this was the worst thing that's ever happened. That's not important. What's important is that what you think and what you feel about it being out there and this being on the record so that future generations can never look back and say, January 6, 2021, it wasn't that bad. Oh, it was just like this little thing. Because if we allow this to just kind of go away without putting everything on record, that actually contributes to everything else we talked about, where you are able to just kind of mold history into this little folk tale and push it off to the side, not look at the ugly. Let's just look at the good. It's like, we had an election and, some people who protested, and that being the tale. We need our history. And that's why I'm okay with that, because again, whether it be acknowledging the past or whether it be acknowledging the present, we have to acknowledge every single thing about this country as it still grows. Because as we go, this country is only 2.5 centuries old. There are empires and countries who've been around for 5,000 years. This country is young. This country is growing, is going through growing pains. We've been around for a hiccup, and we've been through so many changes already. And there's going to be a lot more that we go through. So one day, deep down the line, when there's this grand American culture that, and you'll be able to look back at the beginnings of it, and you say, okay, well, 2.5 centuries in, this is what they went through. That needs to be an actual historical document. That doesn't need to be a folk tale. That doesn't need to be a comic book of what America was. We need to see America for what it is. And for us, as minorities, it is important for us to get our names on the record and to get our experience on the record for what we've gone through, for what we refuse to tolerate anymore. and for what we, what we're able to stand up and say this is not okay. And, it's all important. Everything that we do here is important. Everything that we talk about is important. All these things that we point out to the public sphere is important because we got to get it all on the record. We got to put it down. We got to fill out our scrolls as they used to do in ancient Greece. We got to put it all. We got to put it all down. So I do like what was done for that, if nothing else. So now they'll be able to get on with the business of running the country, hopefully, and we were able to get that historical record on point so we could stop playing games and telling folk tales.
Okay, I definitely could agree with that end of it, and as you said, hopefully it ends soon, and we can get back to seeing policies start being rolled out, and a couple of these people within Biden's cabinet that still need to finish the process of being nominated through and accepted and all that. We need to see all these processes finished out once this impeachment is wrapped up on that end, good or bad in between. Um, Basically, heading out into next week, as you said, just we've got to continue to push. I know we spoke about 2 weeks ago, the lack of enthusiasm behind the movement, or you know, it doesn't see that social media presence of activists that you did quite mid last year. So we gotta constantly remember to keep that spark, and make sure we continue to keep our eyes on the true goal, which is equality for all Americans across the board. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I would, to close this out, I would say that we cannot wait for the next tragedy to remind ourselves, to remind us of our voice. We were given these platforms for a reason. We were given, this engine to be able to get those words out there for a reason. We need to continue to organize, continue to speak, continue to post, continue to rail against these things that are going to continue to hold us back. The forces that hold us down are not taking a break. They're not getting bored. They're not finding something else to do with their day. They are a machine that doesn't stop. And if we want to put that machine to rest, and we want to mold this thing into something that benefits every single one of us, then the energy against that movement must be equal to or greater than the energy that would hold it down. And that's really, the gist of it. We have to continue to remember our personal power. I know I've spoken this before, that we need to personalize our fight. There are specific things that are pretty powerful to me. I brought up the Utah thing today because the whitewashing of history is powerful to me. Find what it is that's powerful to you and speak on it. Don't hold it back. Bring it out. Give it to everybody straight. Put it on the page. Suggest it for a topic. Come on and talk about that topic. Whatever it is, but we need to continue to, push all of those different things, because as we talked about today, 55 years to today, this fight is not only the same and still raging, but we still recognize how far we have to go to get there. So we can't do that, just kind of sitting around waiting on the next tragedy to organize our rage. We need to continue to harness our energy, to harness our power, and to harness our voices, to get these things moving and keep it moving, and not allow those who are pretty happy with the way the system is now to continue to benefit off that system at our expense. We are a minority alliance organization because they're not. And we're going to continue to push our thing. We're going to continue to talk about it. We're going to continue to push things out there, and we'll continue to throw snowballs at that hill until that snowball becomes an avalanche that they cannot stop. So as we go into the rest of this week, I will tell everybody again, be well, take care of each other, Keep bringing those topics, and we will talk to you guys next week.